You are about to enter the truth zone.
My name is Jonathan Gilliam, and this is The Experts. And welcome back. It has been a few days since I did a podcast, and it's Christmas right now. It's actually about 2:47 a.m. Christmas morning. And as everybody that tunes into this podcast knows, I usually do the podcast late at night or early in the morning, depends on your sleeping habits. And I figured today I would come on here. It's not going to be a long podcast. In fact, it's probably going to be a pretty short one. But I wanted to share with you all, some interesting things about Christmas and about where we're at right now and how I hope that, this podcast has helped out. But to give you all some guidance as we kind of take a breath. Christmas every year is very similar to, it's a poignant moment every year. And it's interesting because we're celebrating the birth of Christ, of Jesus, the Messiah. Most people don't realize that Christ is not his last name. Christ means the Messiah. And so we're celebrating the birth of God becoming a man, and we were celebrating his birth, but it's God becoming a man, in which he came into the world purposely to sacrifice himself. Very similar to a warrior who sacrifices themselves or carries their fallen or their wounded off the field of battle. Now, although we are celebrating the birth of Christ, and it's very, very special. It's very special. The awakening that you get is, most people aren't around somebody when they're born. Right. It's and what's interesting, I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, that there's only two things that we know in this world for sure. That's birth and death. We know that anybody that's here has been born, and we understand birth, and we understand death, and we know that if you are born, you will die. There's nobody who has ever lived forever, and then we know that where there's a beginning, there's an end. We know that. It's instinctual. We don't know what was before we were born, and we don't know, except for what we're told, what will be after we die. But we do know what occurs, and we have the ability to shape and form who we are and what we become, and how we react to certain things, what we learn while we're here in between these 2 points that we know for sure will happen. It's the only two definite things that we know for sure will happen to us about life, is that if we are here, we were born, and we will die, because everybody and everything dies. So the awakening that we have around Christmas is, if you've ever seen a child born, it's very similar, and you're going to think, this is where I'm going with this. It's very similar to seeing someone die. It's very similar to the same awakening that you have when you attend a funeral. So the feeling that you have, this awakening that you have around Christmas, is very special. It's very special because there's really only two places that you will have this type of an awakening in life. And that's if you see the birth of a child, or if you experience the death of someone or something that you truly love. It's an awakening. It's a moment in time where everything is prioritized. You understand the reality of what is real, what is not, what what means something, what doesn't, what you rely on to live and to sustain life. All these things fall into place when you experience these two things. And I would have to say that it's actually more powerful when you see death. But what's interesting also about it is, and I've seen both birth and death. I've never actually seen a woman give birth, but I've been in the presence of a brand new born child, and it's very fascinating because I've also was with my father when he passed away, and I've been with other people when they've died, very close to me, and they're very similar. Once you understand death, it becomes the other side of birth, as if you could go before somebody's born and go to the other side, the spiritual side, and shake their hand and say, okay, you're getting ready to go. And boom, they go into birth. And then you don't see them again because they're born into this world, right? Death is, once you understand the reality of death, it's very similar. You are literally on this side of the birth into the next part of this crazy, interesting thing that we're a part of. So I don't know how much of this I've shared before on this podcast. I know I've talked about this before, but there's a couple little stories I'm going to tell you here. When I was a SEAL and we were doing our platoon workup, I don't know who decided for us to do this. I don't know if other platoons did this. I know that our platoon did this. And we went to go see an autopsy. And we went to the location, one of the military hospitals, and they had somebody who had passed away, and she was, I think, in her 40s. And so they I don't know if it was natural cause. They knew that she had cancer. I don't know her name. I don't know anything about her and her family. We got to experience the autopsy. And most people don't realize that, and you're probably asking yourself, where is he going with this and what does this have to do with Christmas? Well, I'm going to tell you. Okay, I'm going to tell you. So we go see this autopsy. Why did they want us to see an autopsy? Well, they wanted us to experience, for those people who've never experienced the human body in its unnatural state, which is wide open, cut open, and experiencing and seeing that actually occur is as close to experiencing somebody being wounded or killed in front of you. Most people don't realize that when you die, when a physical creature dies, they will go through a series of steps in their body. Their body will go through a series of steps as it dies. People think that death is instant. When my father passed away, and I was right there, and I lifted his eyelids open and looked, and there was definitely something missing. There was no energy in that body. It was done. And for the longest time, that was my opinion of death right there. When I lost my dog, Jessie, who she was just the most amazing creature in 2014. Everybody knows how close I was to Jessie and Rico, my two dogs. They were everything to me. And Jessie passed away, and it was extremely, extremely difficult because I looked at death right there. That's the event that happens. She's no longer with us now. She's in paradise with the other animals, and yes, animals do go to heaven. I think there's proof of that in the Bible. And it was a very difficult time for me. When Rico passed away in 2018, I had done a little bit more studying and reflecting on the reality of death. Jessie and the pain that I went through with losing her helped me reflect back on when my father died and the other people that I'd been with when they died. And 2018 was just a very difficult time for me. I mean, as far as death goes, my good friend Ron Bellum passed away. my dog Rico passed away. Actually, Ron passed away in 2019, but before that, it was good friend Yvonne Grand, her father Wally Grand, who was an incredible mentor to me, my dog Rico, and then in January, Ron Bellin passed away. So I saw a lot of people close to me move on, pass in that period of time. And what was interesting is when Rico, this little dog that little Jack Russell, who had taught me so many lessons throughout my life, same with Jesse, taught me one last lesson right as he passed. Unfortunately, I was at the NRA convention in Dallas, and I'm going to get back to the story about the autopsy here in just a minute. This is all leading into that, okay? So Rico, when he passed, I was in Dallas for the NRA convention. He was very, very old. He was 18 years old. And while we were there, I came back from the convention that day, and he was at a friend's, and he was, I could tell something was wrong. And unfortunately, his little heart valve had let loose, and he was dying. So I took him to the vet. The vet said, yeah, he's definitely dying. They tried to do what they could to sustain him so I could get him home to Arkansas, which was about 5 to 7 hours away. It's really about 7 hours away from where I was. And it was getting late in the evening. It was 5 o'clock already. So we did what I could, and I started going with him, and it just went downhill pretty quick. And so I turned around, I went back, and we had to do what was necessary at that point in time to send Rico on his way. And we had, I'd had many conversations with God about this, conversation with Rico, and had learned so much from Jesse passing that I looked at his eyes and I said, this is the time. This is the time. Well, I always wondered when this would be, and I love you, buddy. And I will see you again. And enjoy your time in paradise until I get there. And the doctor administered the medication, and as he passed, and I could feel his heart, in an instant, he was looking at me, and it was, and people who've been around, people who've passed, they've seen this, but this little dog, his face completely changed, and for just a second, his face looked like a puppy. It didn't look like pain. It looked like a puppy again. And he had this incredible look in his face. And this doctor, I don't even know his name. I don't even know the doctor's name, but he was old. He was in his 70s. And I looked at him. I said, that was amazing. Did you see that, doc? And he's like, what's that? And I said, he looked at me, and the look in his eye, his face literally changed, and he looked like a puppy again. And he said, well, I guarantee you one thing. I said, what's that, doc? He goes, he was looking at something much more beautiful than you. And whew, that was an amazing experience. Now, where am I going with this? Well, I had a 7-hour trip to get back with Rico back to Arkansas, and I wanted him to be buried next to Jesse, and we have a little burial site there with all the different animals. And so I get in my RV, and I put him down there down next to me, and I start driving. And at that point in time, it was already after 6 o'clock, going on 7 o'clock, and I got about 2 hours from where my mom lives, and it was getting late, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It was probably about 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, and I just couldn't. I started getting tired. I was stressed, and so I thought, you know what? I need to do some research, because I need to find out if I stop and go to sleep, because you don't want to drive through the Ozarks if you're tired. You could run off the road. Deer could run out in front of you. Your reaction is going to be bad, and I didn't want to join Rico yet in paradise. So I pulled off and called a buddy, and we did some research real quick about even though I've been, when I was in the FBI, I didn't go through the body farm. That's where they have in Knoxville, Tennessee. That's where they have all the dead bodies that they study, how they decompose and all this stuff. A friend of mine went through that, and I got to go there, experience it, and understand a little bit about how these things occur, how the breakdown occurs. So we did some quick research, and I thought, okay, well, I will, I'll leave the RV on. I'll crank the air conditioner. I'll crank the other air conditioner I got in the back. I'll lay him right here, and it should be cold enough in here where we'll be fine. Because I got to try to get some sleep and then get up and then get him there. So long story short, I finally get back to Arkansas. I wake up the next morning. I lay there with him, and it just it was a very calming moment. Right. It was a very awakening moment where, again, like I said before, all these priorities just pop into place, and you know what's important in life, and you know how much you value life and those who you love at that moment in time. And for me, and death is not always an enjoyable experience. I wouldn't say it's ever an enjoyable experience, but it's not always a calming experience for many. In this case, for me, it was a calming experience. And so I get back in the vehicle, I drive, I get the rest of the way. We started digging the grave. I still had the RV going cold in there. It had to be in the 50s in that RV. And my stepdad and I, Jim, we dig the grave and wait for my mom to get there. She was at the church cleaning the church. Listen, they're in their 70s, and I think Jim might even be close to 80 now, and they still work. It's unbelievable how hard these two individuals work and what they do for their community. So they still work and set the example and the standard for everybody. So she finally gets there, and it had been 22 hours pretty much, because it was in the evening now, and it was later in the day. And so it had been about 20 to 22 hours since Rico had passed. And I kept thinking, I'm getting ready to put this dog into the ground who's been with me for 18 years. And I should be very, very heartbroken right now. And I was, but I was, in some weird way, I was almost excited after studying for even a little bit the reality of what happens to our bodies when we get into the ground, and the reality of what is happening, what's working. And it was fascinating to me that my buddy, who had been with me for so long, had moved on, but his body was still here, and I was getting ready to put it into the ground, and all this work was going to be done. The way you decompose, the way certain bugs and insects will come to the body at that specific time. They won't go there at other times. Only people think that once something dies and it's on the ground, that it's just going to be inundated by bugs and stuff. They only come at certain times throughout that process. Once you understand that death is not just a final act and that's it, you start to realize that there's a lot more going on in this world and in this life than just death. So every day, we get him in the ground, and as I'm putting him in the ground, I give him one more petting. I put his bone in there, his bowl in there, and he's right next to Jesse, and I said, get to work, boy. And so we covered him up and buried him under there, and every day I would go down there and sit with them and think about what's going on underneath the ground. All the activity that was going on down there was amazing. I could almost feel the energy of this dog's body going back into the earth. And you remember, Rico's gone. He's in paradise. But the body and the soul they're combined. There's an energy there that lives in both. It's not just the soul. And so I know these things are going on under there. I know that there's certain instructions that the body follows in order to break down, and that the bugs and the insects and all these things that are coming up there, they're doing their job. And I literally could feel the activity that was going on there as I went down there every day. And it was comforting to me. It was comforting to me to know that moment in time was not the end. that there was still some amazing stuff going on down there. And thinking about how the spirit, how the spirit of this dog, just like the spirit of my father, or the spirit of this woman who we were about to see this autopsy. This was years ago when we were about to see this autopsy. It's just amazing to think about the spirit going to paradise and the body working. It's working, and it was just amazing. Okay, it's an amazing experience. Can't say that enough. Let's go backwards now to that autopsy story. This is, Rico died in 2018. This woman that I saw in the autopsy was in 2001 or 2002 when I saw this. So even though I saw this autopsy, a lot of this stuff, when you experience something, sometimes it's an epiphany, which I'm going to talk about now, and sometimes it takes years, like it did with Rico, to see the reality of a lesson that you've learned. But when this autopsy occurred, I'm sitting there, and for the week prior to this, I'd been working on a Jeep. I'm a big Jeep guy. I love Jeeps, and so I took I put a lift kit on it, and it was an 83 Jeep CJ7, and I put some big 35-inch tires and a lift kit on it, about 7 to 10 inches of lift. I don't remember which. And I was going to take the engine out of it and put, you can't have big tires that have a big engine, so I wanted to put a big engine there. So I got a Corvette engine from a 67 Corvette and was putting it in there. So when you take an engine out of a vehicle, there's a couple bolts that are on the frame. You undo those, and if you're going to take it with the transmission, which I did, then you take the bolts off the transmission where it connects to the frame. You take this thing. It looks like a small crane. It's called an engine hoist, and you pull it over there, and you connect the chains to the top of the engine, and then you start cranking this thing almost like a jack, and all of a sudden the engine kind of breaks loose, and then you kind of pull it up at an angle and then out of the Jeep, and then you can push it over there and set the engine down, and you pick the other engine and put the other engine back in the same way. Well, as I'm looking at this, after I took the engine out, and I'm sitting here looking at this, it kind of dawned on me. I'm like, wow, this is kind of like a human body when you look at it like this. Over there's the engine, and I'm looking at an empty carcass here. It's got lubrication and fluids. It's got you can see the lines where that stuff goes through. You put energy in it, energy comes out. It has a brain, electrical system. It has 4 appendages like arms and legs. It's got tires. So it was very interesting. You actually have to use your brain in order to move it down the road. So I was kind of fascinated by that, and I thought to myself, I wonder if the guy who invented vehicles, cars, was thinking about this, that instinctually it's very similar, So I didn't give it much more thought. I now go to this autopsy. I know you're sitting here like, man, is he ever going to get to this story? So yes, okay. So I get to this autopsy. It's like a week later, and the doctor, here's this woman who's in her 40s. She's had cancer there, and so the way they do an autopsy is that they make it looks like an eye on your chest. You have going across your chest at the top, going across your abdomen at the bottom, and then the line that goes down the middle and connects those two. It looks like a big capital I. And then they crack the sternum and they open it up. It's just like when you open up the hood of a car. So the doctor opens her up, and I'm sitting here thinking to myself, wow, that's kind of crazy. That almost looked like the hood of a car, the way he opened that up. I didn't give it much of a thought. And now there's 18 guys that are standing within 10 feet of this woman watching this, and we're a little bit elevated, kind of like what you would see in the movies or the TV shows where there's kind of like not bleachers, but there's seats back behind there, and you kind of a little bit elevated where you can see down there what the doctor's doing. And he's talking to us. He's going through this, and he pulls over this little. It looked like a miniature version of the engine hoist, and I was like, I was really starting to look at this and think there's some similarities here that are, this is kind of interesting, you know. He reaches, so this woman's fully exposed, her sternum is completely open. All your internal organs are in a sac, which I never knew that before. I'm not a doctor, okay? You give me a gun and you tell me that's the pointy end, this is the fat end. The fat end goes against your shoulder, and the pointy end is where the bullet comes out, and I go do your job. That's about as much as that's how deep I think in a lot of these things. I'm not a doctor. But so I didn't know that all your internal organs were in a sac, and that's basically what they are. So he lifts this up. He makes a couple incisions in the back to separate this sac from the rest of the body, and he puts a mesh, if I'm remembering correctly, puts a mesh bag almost around these organs, and he cranks this thing and pulls the organs out and then moves them over to the side. And now there's an empty torso there. And in a second, my jaw hit the floor, and I literally leaned on the rail in front of me, and this epiphany just washed over me like warm water in the morning. You know, when you get up and it's cold in the house, you turn the shower on, you wait for it to get warm, and when you get in there, it feels good. That warm water washes over you. This epiphany just washed over me like that. And I realized that feeling that question that I asked myself with the Jeep was actually the right question to be asking. You know, I'm looking at this woman. There's an engine over there. There's an empty torso right here. I can see fuel lines. I can see the electrical system. I know that there's a brain there. There's 4 appendages, just like the Jeep with the tires. She has 2 arms, 2 legs. And it dawned on me how human beings recreate what they know instinctually, right? We only know that birth happens, and we know that death happens, and those are the only 2 things that we know for sure. I would say overtly, okay, that we outwardly see and know. Now, there's a lot of other things that we instinctually know. You just don't think about it. You don't realize that you know it. For instance, if I take you and I hold you underwater, you're going to fight me for air, right? That's instinctual. That's that's instinct happening in you. And you know right now, just me telling you that, you know, yes, of course. If I asked you that question, you would say, yes, of course, air. I'm leaving part of this story out because this was later on, but I don't want to confuse people with this stuff. But where I told this story to an atheist, they didn't get it. But so if I march you through the desert, right, and it's hot, and I keep marching you, eventually you will begin to thirst, and you will long for water. It's instinctual. You have to have water to survive. And if I starve you, doesn't matter if I'm marching you or not, your sole focus, and trust me, I went through Ranger School, I know this, your sole focus will be on food. It's instinctual. Air, water, food. You have to have those things. And your body knows it. You know that, right? That's an overt instinctual knowledge, okay? That is something that even as a baby, you figure out very quickly. I've also seen people as they're dying, and they do not call out for a president or a congressman or a famous person. They don't say, please, Mariah Carey, save me. You know, they don't say that. They say God. They cry out to God. That's an instinct that we don't think about often, but it is something that we know. Again, we know birth, we know death. That's what most people kind of stop at. But when you start to look at the reality of this, there are more things that we know instinctually. Now, again, interestingly, when engineers created the first engine, they figured out very quickly that in order to have a combustion engine, for instance, or in order to have fire, You have to have air, and you have to have fuel. Again, it's something that we know instinctually about ourselves. We don't realize it about other things, but instinctually, we figure out real quick when you blow on fire and it gets bigger that it must have to have air. Now, again, one last time, we know we're born. We know we die. It's instinctual. We know that. And we also figure out very quickly that we need air, water, and we need food. But what most people don't realize is that there's other things that we do in our lives that human beings do on a regular basis that are also instinctual. But we don't realize that. We don't realize it because nobody stops and takes a look at this. They don't have this epiphany moment, which I had with this incredible woman who had passed, and the doctor who was doing the autopsy and having worked on this Jeep, and all these things come together at the moment. I was blessed with this moment in time, and I realized all these different things that we do, that we are following our Creator instinctually. Human beings around the world, everywhere you go, every single profession that you can think of goes through a process. It doesn't matter if it's an apprentice to be a plumber. It doesn't matter if it's a Navy SEAL, a boot camp. It doesn't matter if you're a Russian Spetsnaz or whatever they call their guys, or if you're a doctor in Germany or a doctor in the United States, or it doesn't matter. A profession, architect, lawyer, everybody goes through the same process. You have to be qualified to show up. You have to show some types of qualification to even get there. Once you get there and you show that you are willing, you're willing to do what it takes to get there, then you're going to go through a process of proving that you can be trained. You're going to prove that you can take that knowledge and use that knowledge. You're going to prove that you can be trusted with that knowledge. Trained, trusted, and then that you won't quit. Those are the three big things that you learn in any school that you go to for a profession. Law school, same thing. Will you show up? Can you be trained? Can you be trusted? And will you not quit? Those are three of the biggest things that we do, that we prove when we go through a training. And then, in most cases, you're not just like some kind of unbelievable expert in that field. You actually leave that training, and then you either go to an advanced training or you go to on-the-job training, when that's really where you become what you are longing or striving to be. For instance, in the SEAL teams, you go through SEAL training. Now they go through this thing called SQT. It used to be STT when I was in SEAL tactical training. And so you graduate from BUDS. In BUDS, first of all, you'll never get there. Same thing with boot camp. But at BUDS, you will never get there unless you show up qualified to be there. Once you show up qualified to be there, you are going to do three basic things while you're there. You're going to prove to them that you can be trained. You're going to prove to them that you can be trusted with what you're being trained with, that you're not going to kill yourself or somebody else, and that you won't quit. And you learn a finite set of skills, a very, rudimentary, basic set of skills. Now, when you leave there and you go through this advanced training, you learn a lot more. And by the time you get your trident, it's been about a year, or well over a year, actually, and you are somewhat of an expert and more qualified to be a warrior than most of the military in general that are ground combat forces. But then we go through a platoon workup, and during that period of time, you now become now it's the equivalent of becoming a doctor in your field. You really do become an expert in that field of unconventional warfare. Now, it's the same thing when you go through a police academy or you go through medical school. I like to talk about neurosurgeons a lot because I know a lot of neurosurgeons, and they go through medical school, or first they go through regular school, and then they go through medical school, right? So you get your degree, then you go through medical school. At this point in time, you're more dangerous than anything, and you graduate medical school, you're called a doctor. Well, a neurosurgeon is still going to have overall 15 years of training before they're ever board certified. And even then, they have to, in order to take their boards, they have to go through this incredible series of events to get to that point, and even that, some people fail. So 15 years of training before they actually are board certified neurosurgeons. All the while they're learning their expertise and honing their expertise by actually doing an on-the-job training. So all of this in an instant is flashing through my head as I am looking at this woman on the table. And I realized that she's not just, they didn't just design a car that mimics a human being. We have also in our lives designed this way of training humans to be an expert in a specific field. It is instinctual, is what I'm getting at. It is what we know. We know this subconsciously, just like food, just like water, just like air. Now that I pointed this out to you, you're never going to look at this stuff the same. And in a lot of ways, I'm not saying this is a secret to life, but this is kind of the secret recipe, I do believe. And I pray that, and I do believe that the reason I have this knowledge is because God wants me to share this knowledge. So your life, you're born into this life. What happens before then, I don't know. God says that he knows us before we were formed in the mother's womb. So some people take that as though we are spirit before we go into the physical form in a womb, that we are actually a creature before we get to that point. I don't know that. I can't say that that's true. God does say that he knew us, before we were in the mother's womb. So that could be. That could be. It could also be that he's just talking about how he knew the thought of us. I don't know. But we for whatever reason, whether we're existing before or not, we show up, right? We're birthed into this world. And while you're here, when you look at somebody's life from birth to death, the reality, no matter what they achieve, how many riches they have, no matter how hard it was or how poor they were or what they fail at, in the end, when you're on your deathbed, the biggest things that will come out of your life here is, did you prove to God that you can be trained? Can you learn? Are you just here to have fun, or are you actually going to learn and experience things and grow from that? So can you be trained? Can God trust you? Are you a trustworthy person? That's probably one of the most important things that you can prove in your life. Can you be trained? Can you be trusted? And will you choose him and not quit? That's fascinating to me when I think about that at death, that those are the things that it purely mimics what we do to human beings ourselves in order to get them to prove that they can be an expert in a field that they choose to go in. That's fascinating to me, that we ended up developing a system that is exactly like life. And why is that? Well, it's the same reason why, we cry out for God when we die or when we're in a scary situation. I can guarantee you, when you get on a roller coaster and you start going around and the thing starts cracking and popping, you're thinking, I don't know if this thing is if I may fly off of this thing. Or if you've ever been in a plane where there's terrible turbulence and it freaks you out, you're not clinging to anything, but I really hope God loves me. I know God is real. You know God is real in those circumstances because it's instinctual. You're born, and you will long as a human being, you will search for your maker. and to know him. It is instinctual in you. So it's the same thing with life. Life is and has been created in a way to give us the opportunity to prove that we can be trained, trusted, and won't quit. And then we die. And when you look at all these other things that I've shown you that we do instinctual, knowing and unknowing, then you have to assume, and it's a pretty good educated assumption, that when we die, that there is purpose and meaning, and that we will, in fact, learn and grow more, just like the advanced training that we go through in the SEALs, when we go through SQT, and when you go on and go through your platoon workup. And then you have other tests like the board meeting, the boards that they have in, not board meeting, the boards that they have in neurosurgery. The same type of test. It gets repeated over and over in different careers. I have to assume that that is the same thing based on the totality. I talk about this a lot, the totality of the circumstances, or the totality of the evidence. When I look at how life is and how we recreate things or create things based on our instinctual knowledge that we may or may not know. When I look at life and I look at how we train other humans, I have to say that probably, most likely, we're in this life to be basically trained, to learn a finite set of skills, to prove that we can be trained, trusted, and won't quit. And then when we leave here, based on what we do here, that is where the real training begins. That's where real life begins. That's where you walk amongst God and amongst Jesus and amongst the angels and others. And that is where you really start to get trained and prove yourself. And so when we look at Christmas, I could give this lecture, this speech any day of the year. It's not going to have the same effect, and I hope you get to hear this today and within the next couple days. But during Christmas, you have that awakening that you usually only have when somebody passes away, or if you're in the midst of, or get to experience the birth of a child. And you're awake right now. It doesn't matter about presents. It doesn't matter about, any of these other things. The reality is that the mention of the birth of Jesus, who is God, does something to this world, and it awakens you. And now you can see that it makes a tremendous amount of sense when you look at the reality of this warfare that's going on, and why, as a human being, you were sent into this world, and why Adam and Eve fell from grace, so that you could know good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil, so that you could actually prove that you can be trained, trusted, and won't quit. If we were just spirit, there would be no way to prove this. There would be no way to prove your worthiness. There would be no way to prove that you are trustworthy, trainable, and that you will not quit. Because spirit alone is not going to be inundated with desires, is not going to be inundated with a choice to do the wrong thing. Those are based in the physical body, which gets back to the thing that I was saying earlier about when Rico passed away and understanding what goes on with the body once it's in the ground. When I saw my father die and I lifted his eyes open and at 13 years old and looked in there and saw nothing that was there. I saw his eyes, I saw physicalness, but there was something missing. That spirit, alone and separate from the body, I believe, based on what I've read and what I've seen, is not capable of understanding good and evil the way it would after it's lived in a body for a period of time. Understanding that will help you see the the reality of this whole picture that we're in, the reality of life, the reality of death, and all made possible through the defeating of Satan, the defeat of evil, and not just the defeat. Remember, Jesus came into the world, Jesus who is God came into the world, paid the ultimate sacrifice so that we could have that choice, so that we could have faith. Faith is the one unmeasurable act. Faith is not something that you do. It's not a work. It's a choice. So when we look at all this stuff that I've talked about, and it's probably way out of order, and I hope it made some sense to you as you listen to it, the reality is this moment in time right now, 2020, no matter what's going on in your life, no matter how bad it's been terrible for so many people. The very mention of the Christmas season, and when you get on Christmas Day, there is an awakening that occurs that typically only happens in your life in two other times, seeing birth and experiencing death. And you should take advantage of this experience. My father passed away on Christmas Day. That's probably one of the reasons why I'm able to see this so well and understand this feeling of enlightenment on this day, along with the fact that I've seen the birth of a child and experienced death in this way. But now you see why the importance of Jesus being born into a human body. Now you understand the concept of life and why Adam and Eve fall from grace and eating of that apple so that we could be exposed to the knowledge of good and evil, why it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense when you think about it. And in the end, this is the thing that really stands out the most, is that all this hardship that you go through now, and oh my gosh, you think to yourself, this is it. I don't have a job, or, my dog passed away, or, I have a terminal illness, and, my, parent died, or my sibling died, or whatever it is, this tragedy that befalls you. And even worse, I won the lottery, I'm a success, I got promoted, all these different things that you believe are great, whether it's bad or good, the moment you pass, that opportunity to prove that you can be trained, trusted, and won't quit will be over. It will be done. And anybody who's been through a professional training and looks back and says, man, and you try to think, challenge yourself with this. If you've gone through law school or SEAL training or medical school, or if you were an apprentice to do one of these technical jobs, think back on the people that you went through training with that didn't make it. Most of those people are like a ghost in the wind. You do not remember those people. Maybe you have a concept of them, but they came and went. And you don't want to be that person. You don't want to end this life when that opportunity is over, because all the success, all the money, all the fulfilled desires, all of the sorrows, all of the anguish, all the things that you can get down on yourself and pushed off your path in which you should be on, remember, good and bad both, won't matter that the very instant that your soul leaves your body. If it was not for the body, if it was not for the opportunity to be here, you would never have had the chance to prove who you are to the God that gave you life and that you will walk with in the next life. That's pretty damn fascinating when you think about it. Now, one last thing before I sign off here. I guess this wasn't a short podcast after all. It's now 3:44 in the morning, and I started this at a little bit after 2 o'clock. And 37 years ago tonight, or this morning, at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's right around 2 o'clock in the morning. That's why I chose to do the podcast at this time. Right around this time, my my father was in a coma. I was 13 years old, and I went down to Florida. He was in Sarasota, Florida, and my father was a failure in his life. He had an IQ of over 160, but was verbally abused by his mom and spoiled by his dad. They were divorced most of his life. And that occurred at a very young age. And for somebody who is considered a genius and has these issues of being spoiled and told that you won't be anything, there can be mental issues that develop. And my father spent his life able to achieve anything, but pretty much walking away from almost everything he did. He could take a car completely apart, put it back together with no instructions. He could paint incredible pictures on the wall. He could cook incredible food, but he was a failure the majority of his life. He had 3 different wives, birthed 5 daughters and 1 son, and died at the age of 41. But the remarkable thing about him was that before he died, he got cancer at the age of 39, I believe. When he realized, and I was a kid at 12, 11 years old, I used to preach to him and say, hey, do you know Jesus? What do you know? Have you ever thought about this? This is before he even got cancer. I would talk to him about this stuff, and he always would blow it off and thought it, because I've had this insight. I had the blessing of my mom and her family, and they always made sure that we went to church, and it was a blessing for me as a child to be brought up in that way. And my father never gave it any thought. And then a little bit before he passed, it was that summer of 1983. I went and lived with him for a year down in Sarasota, Florida, with my stepbrothers and my youngest sister. Laura was born down there. And Mary, his last wife, I went and lived with him down there, and he had a terrible time while I was down there with drinking and facing that he was dying and going through chemotherapy, and his body was wilting away, and he saw all, just was facing all these terrible fears. And at that point, he was still an alcoholic. And I went down there and stayed with him for a little less than a year. Left my sisters up in Arkansas, and it was away from my mom for the first time in my life for a period of time. And I got to see a man dying over that period of time. But before I left, an incident occurred, and he had a severe drinking incident where he was completely wasted for several days. And it's interesting how God works in your life. He had seen a movie where he saw somebody that was getting an autopsy, and it freaked him out, and he went on a drinking binge. And it was terrible. I don't want to go into details, but it was horrible. I was scared. I was very scared as a 12-year-old, and my neighbors we're going to go fishing at Lake Okeechobee, and they asked me if I wanted to go, so I went with them. I came back that night, and when my father found out how scared I was, and there's more to this story, but I don't want to right now on this podcast. I'm not going to bring it up, but when he found out what had occurred and how scared I was, when I came back in the house that night, he said that he would never drink again. And he got down on his knee in front of me and said, I will never drink again. And to my knowledge, he never drank again. I left not long after that and went back to Arkansas. And then that was in the summer. And then he started getting tremendously worse, but he started developing a relationship with, I don't know if it was a priest or a preacher. And he, as he declined, started to understand the reality of Jesus. He accepted him as his Lord and Savior. And he he really did know God just before his death. So we go down there, and the interesting thing is that there's a famous strip club in Sarasota, Florida. They had the story about my father and wanting to, and I don't know how it got in the news, but he was wanting to see his kids before he passed away. And the woman who owned that, who was very well known in Sarasota, she paid for all of the children to be there with him, and our round trip tickets back to Arkansas. So we got to be there, and when he passed, before he passed away, it was Christmas Eve night, about 2:00 in the morning, and the nurse that was with us, his legs were really swollen because of the chemotherapy, and she was rubbing his legs, but she was rubbing his leg wrong, and I knew she was rubbing it wrong, and I got mad at her. Again, now I'm 13 years old, and I told her, I said, "You're doing it wrong, and you're hurting him," and you could hear there was emotion in my voice. My father had been in a coma for 3 days. He came out of his coma. He came out of his coma, and he looked around, and everybody was shocked. There was only 4 of us there, and it was 2:00 in the morning, and he looked around, and he said, and I said to him, I said, "Merry Christmas, Daddy. We made it. You made it you got your wish. We're all here, and and it's Christmas morning." And he said, he goes, "Yep, that's right, Slick. We made it." And I said, "I love you, Daddy." And he said, "I love you too, Slick." He used to call me Slick. And he went back into his coma. 12 hours later, everybody's there at the house on Christmas Day in Sarasota, Florida, and my father passed away. At that moment, I went in there. I was right there. I'll go over there, and I remember sitting there looking around and thinking, I wonder what he's seeing right now. I wonder if he is floating above me looking down. I wonder if he's in paradise right now. I wonder what he's seeing. This is fascinating, and I looked, his eyes were closed, and I raised his eye open, and I looked at his eye, and there was nothing there. He was gone. There was at 13 years old, I saw the reality that there was life in that body, even though he was sick and in a coma, and then that life was gone. And it was an awesome, an amazing, tragic, but growth for me in Sarasota, Florida in 1983, 37 years ago to this day. It's a day where we celebrate the birth of our Savior, that allows us to have this opportunity to prove that we can be trained, trusted, and won't quit, and to get to know him and to see what we're made of. And it's the day when my father, who was born on Thanksgiving, went home after failing his whole life and succeeding in life right before he passed on. Amazing story. Remember, the guy or girl who graduates from medical school last in their class is still called the doctor. I hope you all have a Merry Christmas and listen to the entirety of this particular episode of the Experts Podcast, because there's something that you have to realize about this day that rolls around every year. We are celebrating on Christmas the birth of Jesus, the Christ, the Messiah. But it's also important that you realize the magnitude of this day is so great that you are awake. Every Christmas that rolls around, your priorities fall into place for that day. You know, no matter how bad or good it is, that this is a special day. And it's a special day because you can see reality, that you mean something and you have a purpose. I'm Jonathan Gilliam. This is The Experts. The truth has arrived. Happy birthday, Lord.